Good evening, everyone out there on Facebook. And for those of you who have joined us here tonight on Zoom, my name is Stephanie Coleman. I am the Autism Family Educator at the Kansas LEND. LEND stands for Leadership Education and Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities, hence the word LEND. We are an interdisciplinary training program that is housed at the Division of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics at KU Medical Center here in Kansas City, Kansas. We're really excited to have you tonight. And tonight we're going to be talking about employment first with Craig Knutson from the Kansas University Center on Developmental Disabilities. That's at our Lawrence campus. And he's going to be talking to us tonight on employment first and building a better future. So take it away, Craig. Oh, and just a little, I apologize, Craig. Little housekeeping for those of you on Facebook. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the section. I will get them asked of Craig for you. And for those of you here on Zoom, if you have your camera on and the slides are down, you will show up on Facebook. So I just wanted to let you know that because many people don't want to show up on Facebook. So letting you know, and we are recording this to put out on our YouTube page. So now go ahead, Craig, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I really appreciate you inviting me tonight to talk about employment first and building a better future through employment. So do a quick overview of our agenda this evening. We'll do some introductions, talk a little bit about employment first policy, what type of employment supports are available for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities here in Kansas. Then we'll kind of tackle some of the myths surrounding employment that not only society has, but that families have as well. And then we'll open up the floor for questions. I'd also add, not only will we have a question and answer period at the end of our discussion today, but feel free to submit any questions either through chat on Facebook or through chat here on Zoom if you're participating that way. Or if you want to just raise your hand and ask a question, feel free to do so as well. So let's go ahead and do some quick introductions. My name is Craig Knutson. I am with the KU Center on Developmental Disabilities. I am a research project manager there at the UCED. One of the projects that I am a project manager for is the Kansas Employment First grant. So that's one of the reasons why I'll be talking about employment first. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of go around the room here for the folks who are on Zoom and ask you your name and why you're interested in employment. And so, Stephanie, I'm going to go ahead and start with you.
Okay, well, I'm Stephanie Coleman. Why am I interested in employment? Because first of all, everyone deserves to work in competitive integrated employment. They deserve to earn a little spending money and to be able to afford to live a good life. And that means having their own house and be able to pay for things. Not only is it nice for the money, but it's also the self-esteem. I love my job. Everybody should be able to love their jobs too. So that's quick and dirty.
Nice. Colleen, how about you? Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us why you think employment's important?
Sure. So I'm Colleen Hunter. I'm a targeted case manager in the Johnson County, Douglas County areas. So I have been in this field for almost 40 years, and my first job, I don't even know how long I was doing that, but my first job was doing supported employment services, job development, job coaching for people with developmental disabilities. And so even though I have kind of strayed from that, it's still near and dear to my heart. And it's something that, when I have individuals on my caseload wanting a job, I just like knowing what's out there and all the newest and latest resources. So thank you for presenting.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for supporting people in their quest for employment. So
you too.
Supported employment specialist prior and as a targeted case manager, because getting people on the right path and being a systems navigator is so important. Bertha,
I agree.
would you like to introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in employment?
Hi, sure. So my name is Bertha Guillen. I am a parent advocate, and I'm also a research assistant at KU, um, supporting some projects there. But I'm employed. So my history, my professional background has been in human resources, and I know the importance of building partnerships with businesses, with small businesses, and even partnering with corporate companies to help build career paths for individuals. I think that employment creates so much independence and freedom for choice. So trying to soak it all in and learn to see how we can support both ends of, individuals who are trying to get employed and employers.
Wonderful. And I would also invite folks who are watching on Facebook, if they want to enter into chat why they're interested in employment, I'd invite you to do that as well. For me, I'm personally interested in employment especially employment first, is because, the difference it makes in a person's life. One of the things we know about people who engage in competitive integrated employment is that they have better health outcomes. They are more included in their communities. They have, as Stephanie mentioned, money to do things that they want to do. I mean, what good is life if you can't enjoy, the things you want? And without money, you don't have quite as good of a quality of life. So I think employment really is a key to having a good life for everyone, whether you have a disability or not. So a little bit about employment first policy. I don't know how many people know this, but Kansas was the first state in the nation to adopt employment first legislation in 2011. It was really kind of a revolutionary step. And since then, quite a few states have adopted employment first legislation. Unfortunately, in Kansas, even though we have adopted employment first legislation, we haven't quite turned that promise into a reality so that everyone who has a disability has that option for employment. And we'll talk about some of the steps that we are taking in Kansas right now to turn that promise into a reality. So I guess the first question is, what is employment first? So employment first legislation sets as the official policy of the state of Kansas that competitive and integrated employment is the first option when serving people with disabilities. The employment first legislation also established definitions of competitive and integrated employment and details the requirements of state agencies to conform to the law. I think what's really important about this is the competitive and integrated aspect of employment. A lot of times we will hear conversations about employment spectrum, but that's not necessarily what employment first is all about. It really is about the competitive and integrated aspect of employment. And I should note that Kansas Employment First law and their definitions of competitive integrated employment also match the federal definitions of competitive integrated employment as found in the Rehabilitation Act and also in the Workforce Innovations and Opportunities Act. So we talk a little bit about competitive integrated employment, but what exactly is that? Competitive integrated employment is full or part-time work at minimum wage or higher with wages and benefits similar to those without disabilities performing the same work and fully integrated with coworkers without disabilities. I guess the simple way to put what competitive integrated employment is in plain language, it's a real job with real wages. I'm going to share a video here of Colin talking a little bit about
Colin's employment journey.
I work for the Self-Advocate Coalition of Kansas. I am their legislative liaison. At least that's what my business card says. But I do whatever they would require of me to do.
Colin's support system.
It supports me in that I have a wonderful, unwavering support network. And that supports me in supporting my work, which I do to support others and working toward the ultimate goal of fully integrated, fully competitive, integrated, competitive, normal employment for people in what I'd call normal mainstream settings, you know.
The impact of a job coach.
That woman was the greatest person I've ever met. I mean, she's the one who literally said, I go to this movie theater all the time. I want to try working there. And she's the one who really stepped up and just got me an application, and we filled it out. And then, you know, I remember days in the library tearing tickets with her and talking and working through the motions of this, what you would think is such a simple job, but it's not, you know, and just her encouragement and her belief in, you know, what I wanted to do.
People supporting you make a difference.
The people behind me, my teachers, you know, just instilling in me this want, this need to work, this sort of, I want something better sort of thing. I don't want to stop at I know the road is hard.
What Colin loves about his job.
I love that I get paid to advocate for myself and others to improve the quality of life of people with disabilities, but intellectual and developmental disabilities specifically.
To learn more, please.
I think Colin gives a really good overview of what competitive integrated employment is. And in fact, Colin is really someone who is instrumental in the passage of employment first legislation in Kansas. You know, a couple years prior to the enactment of the legislation, there was discussions in the state about, you know, what should be employment first. What does that mean? And you know, people were saying sheltered workshops are in the community, but Colin explained, no, that's not what integrated means. You know, it's not a physical place necessarily in the community, but it's being integrated with people who may or may not have disabilities, and it's also making at least minimum wage, but you know, ideally and more succinctly, you know, a competitive wage, the same type of wage that a person without a disability would be making. And it's because of his testimony to not only at the time KDADs and the provider networks that we were able to make those first steps towards employment first legislation here in Kansas. So what I'd like to do now is just take a couple moments to talk a little bit about some of the employment supports that are available for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and actually all disabilities here in Kansas that are both formal services and then also some informal supports as well. You might be familiar with many of these. For example, rehabilitation services, otherwise known as VR. And the goal of VR is to help people to get a job. VR services are customized according to each person's unique needs, skills, interests, and abilities. Services which may be provided to help a person become employed include vocational assessment to help you identify your skills, your abilities, your interests, your job goals. There's vocational counseling and guidance. There's physical and mental restoration services, including artificial limbs, psychotherapy and physical therapy, depending on the type of support needs you need. There is training and education to learn new vocational skills. This is also includes some funding for education for certain people if it's deemed, if you're assessed as being needing of those supports and services. There's job placement services, and there's services to help students with disabilities get a job after finishing high school. And there's supported employment and referral to other services as well. Voc rehab services are a little bit different than some of the other supports that we'll be talking about here in a moment, in that they're typically one-time services. And when I say one-time, they're not ongoing. So they tend to be time limited. And once you're settled in a job, they'll typically close a case and then maybe refer you to another service if you need ongoing support in your employment. The next thing I'd like to talk about is workforce centers. Workforce centers are administered through the Department of Commerce, and they offer services and employment services for everyone. They are typically what you would be considered your generic employment service provider, in that they help you find a job whether you have a disability or not. There are 5 different workforce centers areas in Kansas, but there are multiple workforce centers in many of those areas. The next service that I'd like to talk a little bit about is the STEPS program. And the STEPS program stands for Supports and Training for Employing People Successfully. And this is administered through the Working Healthy program at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And it is a program through which people with disabilities or other behavioral health conditions may seek a path to employment without jeopardizing their Social Security benefits or losing their medical insurance coverage. SSI, or Social Security insurance participants currently enrolled in Medicaid are waitlisted for home and community-based services, otherwise known as HCBS services, on the intellectual and developmental disabilities, the physical disability, or the brain injury waiver waitlist, or who are members who have an IDD, physical disability, or brain injury waiver, who are willing to leave their waiver. Those are the people who are eligible to participate in the STEPS program. And the STEPS services include many of the services that are similar to Voc Rehab. They have pre-vocational services. They have independent living skills training. They have personal assistance services. So if you need help with the activities of daily living, you can have a personal care attendant help you out. There's an opportunity for transportation. We know that transportation tends to be a huge barrier for employment for people with disabilities in Kansas. What good is a job if you can't get to it? And so, they help support that kind of ongoing employment through the use of transportation services. They also offer supported employment while you're on the job. And so if you need ongoing job coaching or other supports, that can be provided through the STEPS program. You're also eligible for assistive technology and different types of community service coordination, which is not necessarily the same as targeted case management, but is very similar to it. To receive STEPS services, a participant must be interested in finding and maintaining employment, as well as being between the age of 16 and 65 years old. You must be a Kansas resident, and you must meet the Social Security Administration definition of disability, and you can have a countable income up to 300% of the federal poverty limit. Another wonderful program that's administered through Working Healthy is the WORK program, which is the Work Opportunities Rewards Kansans. And the WORK program is a program through which people enrolled in Working Healthy receive personal assistance services. Working Healthy beneficiaries cannot receive home and community-based services, waiver services, but it's very similar to many waiver services, but you can't qualify for the waiver if you're on the WORK program. In addition to the personal assistance services, WORK services include supported employment, individual employment support services, and assistive technology and independent living counseling. To receive WORK services, people must be eligible for Working Healthy and be receiving services through one of the HCBS waivers, the intellectual developmental disability waivers, the physical disability waiver, or the brain injury waiver. Or they must be on a waiting list to receive the services through these waivers. Waiver screenings must have been conducted within the last 12 months. or they need to be screened for the intellectual and developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, or the brain injury waiver eligibility before a work assessment can be conducted. I know that's a lot of information, but they're really wonderful programs. But I think one of the supports that most people are familiar with is the supports that are provided through the waiver. And there is a waiver service on the intellectual and developmental disability waiver called supported employment. And that's typically ongoing support, including job coaching and job placement and job development. Along with these formal statewide services, there's options to pursue employment using gap services through, for example, if you're in the Kansas City area, you might be familiar with the Mission Project. Other communities have programs that aren't necessarily billing for Medicaid or require Medicaid eligibility that help support people find employment. And then there's also, like for many of us, just informal supports, different people in a person's life. If you think back on your own employment journey, whether you have a disability or not, what's one of the main ways that you find a job or your first job? Typically it's through a family friend or an acquaintance, whether it be through church or through the neighborhood or through someone you know from your school teachers or something like that. And so, all of these are really important in, working together to make sure that we provide employment supports for people with not only developmental disabilities, but across all disabilities. So, like I said, Kansas was the first state to adopt employment first legislation, but that doesn't mean we lead the nation in employment outcomes. So I think one of the questions we need to ask is, why are employment outcomes higher in Kansas? And so there's been several different types of statewide listening sessions. And some of the findings that they found include the following. There is a need for a coordinated system of supports. There's a need to explore and focus on student transition goals, and we need to raise student expectations for transition outcomes. I think one of the things we find is that, our education system, talks a lot about the need to prepare for employment and transition to adulthood, but then we find that people are graduating from high school and they enter into, all too often, a waiting list. People graduate into mom's couch. And one of the things we're trying to do is, make a better coordinated system so we have a seamless transition from high school, that transition from high school into the adult world through employment. And right now, the service system is really fragmented, and we're trying to make some efforts to reverse that. And so one of the things I'd like to do now is discuss some of those efforts that are being undertaken by KU and other stakeholder groups to kind of reverse this trend so that, people who are graduating from high school and transitioning into the adult world have that opportunity to engage in competitive integrated employment. One of the things that we're doing is that KU has a grant with the Administration on Community Living called My Transition, My Career. And I think this is a really exciting program. KU is working with 9 different communities across the state. In some communities, we are supporting what are known as transition councils. And in other communities, we are supporting what are known as community teams. And they really have that same interest, and the same goal, and that is to increase employment outcomes for transition students. One of the things that we're finding in communities is that there is a lack of awareness of the available resources to support people in employment. And both the transition councils and the community teams are working to not only connect the resources with each other, but also may raise awareness with families and self-advocates about the resources in the communities. We talked a little bit earlier about how fragmented the service system is. It's a very complex system. And oftentimes, not only do families not know what resources are available in the community, but you'd be surprised at how often the professionals in the community don't know all of the different resources that are available. And so through the My Transition, My Career program and these transition councils and these community teams. We're raising awareness both for the professional community about the resources available, but also for family members, educators, and the students who are transitioning.
Hey, Craig, we
Yes.
had a question on Facebook. Are high schools obligated to have transition specialists?
So technically, everyone who has a IEP is supposed to have a transition plan. That doesn't necessarily mean that all high schools are going to have a transition specialist. And I think that's really one of the things, ideally, yes, all high schools will have a transition specialist. But we know that there is an underfunding of special education in Kansas. And all too often, one of the things that is the first to hit the chopping block are those transition coordinators and those transition specialists. And one of the things that we're seeing is even in these community teams, for example, is that there are teachers who are doing an incredible job, who are trying to be very innovative, but there isn't that point person, that transition coordinator in their particular school. And that's something we'd really like to kind of reverse and make sure that there is greater not only professional development, but adequate funding to make sure that those resources are available in the schools. Hopefully I answered the question. Okay. So, along with transition, which is, moving from the education into the adult service system, we need to make sure that there is an adequate network to serve the people, the students, as they transition from high school into the adult world. And that's one of the things that KUCDD, which is a KU Center on Developmental Disabilities, where I work, we have a grant with the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services, and KDAD, otherwise known as KDADS. And KDADS manages the different waivers here in Kansas, and they realize the importance of competitive integrated employment. And so we are working with KDADS, stakeholders all across the state, and then several national experts to really move the needle on employment here in Kansas, to make sure that we build capacity and that we develop good policies to ensure that competitive integrated employment is the first option for people with disabilities in Kansas. And so we have 4 main components to our grant. The first one is stakeholder engagement. And the reason why stakeholder engagement is so important is that we want to make sure that this is a Kansas-based solution, and that the solutions and the recommendations that come out of this grant come from Kansas families, come from Kansas self-advocates, come from the provider networks, come from legislators. It's real important that we educate those people who make those financial decisions on what we need to turn that promise of employment first into a reality. And so the KU Center on Developmental Disabilities is leading that component of the grant. Another component of the grant is a part where we are developing policy, analyzing policy, current policy, and making actionable recommendations for actionable policy change. And for that, we are partnering with the Institute for Community Inclusion, otherwise known as ICI, out of the University of Massachusetts of Boston. ICI, you wonder why are we partnering with out-of-state folks for this when we just said that we're going to be working with, want to make sure that this is a Kansas solution. One of the things about working with ICI is that they are really considered the national experts on disability employment policy. There's 3 main projects of national significance that are created by the Developmental Disabilities Act. One of them is what's called the RISP report, which takes a look at residential settings for people with disabilities and where they live. And it takes not only a national look, but a longitudinal look at where people live. And this is conducted by the University of Minnesota. The second main project of national significance is called State of the States. And State of the States looks at where different states invest their money in terms of disability supports. And that's actually housed at KU now. It used to be housed at the University of Colorado. But the third project of national significance takes a look at employment patterns for people with disabilities. And that is really conducted by the Institute for Community Inclusion out of the University of Massachusetts of Boston. So what they are able to do is kind of give us a 30,000-foot view on what policies are working in different parts of the state, not the state, but the nation, and say, hey, have you considered, this policy that currently isn't in Kansas, but is working in, several different other states. And they're guiding some of our discussions and some of our policy decisions that are going to be coming out of the Employment First grant. The third component of this grant is taking a look at data analysis and collection. And this is really kind of important. And people think data, that's kind of boring, but you have to understand how do we know that we are moving the needle on employment if we don't have good data? For the longest time here in Kansas, we thought that we passed Employment First legislation, and then we took a look at the data, and it looked like, we had several thousand people who were receiving supported employment services. It turned out that data was wrong. Rather than the 3,700 people that was originally being reported, it turned out only about 200 to 300 people were receiving employment supports here in Kansas. So that's why it's important to have good data. And for that, we are partnering with the KU Institute for Health and Disability Policy Studies, Jean Hall and Noel Kurth, just a fantastic team who are really experts on data collection and analysis. And it was their data collection and work that really helped set the stage on why Employment First could make a difference in Kansas and the impact it has on people's lives. And then the fourth component that we have is our capacity building component. We can change policies, we can collect good data, but the reality is we really need to grow the provider network here in Kansas. And so one of the things we are doing is we are conducting a pilot project here in Kansas. And for that, we are partnering with the Washington Initiative for Supported Employment, otherwise known as WISE. And with this, we are, with the pilot project, we are training 4 different service providers here in Kansas on supports on how to better support people with disabilities in competitive integrated employment. They are going through what is known as ACRE accredited training. ACRE stands for the Association of Certified Rehabilitation Educators. So it's recognized by VR and national accreditation for the training. And when we train these folks, they get a core competency and core set of skills on how to support people. And as we demonstrate that these type of trainings and work, we're going to be able to replicate these trainings in different parts of the state. I'm kind of excited. We were a little worried that we'd only get 1 or 2 areas of the state covered through this pilot project. But as it turns out, we have a pilot project participant in pretty much every part of the state. We currently have 4 pilot project participants. They are OCCK out of Salina, Down Syndrome Innovation in Kansas City area, Starkey Incorporated in the Wichita area, and then Compass Behavioral Health out in the Dodge City and Garden City area. So not only are we able to train folks who support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but because of the type of providers that were selected by the steering committee, we are able to provide training across disability as well. Question, and Colleen asked if we could tell who those 4 agencies were. Thank you. I didn't see that, and I brought that up. So yeah, we're really excited. Is kind of cool because one of the things that these agencies are doing is that they are meeting with they've been paired with a mentor agency in another state, typically either Oregon or Washington, who have gone through a transition. Typically an organization that used to be primarily a sheltered workshop provider and has made that transition to providing nothing but competitive integrated support services. And they're discussing, how do you make a new business model to support supported employment? What type of training does your staff need? It's really exciting. And even though our grant runs through December 31st of 2025, and we were hoping that we'd reach a certain threshold on the amount of people who would be employed, I'm happy to report, even though we're so early in the grant, we're already about 30% of the people we anticipated being employed through this project already have gotten competitive integrated employment. So our pilot project participants and WISE have just been knocking it out of the park. Any questions about that?
I don't see any on Facebook.
Okay. What I'd like to talk about next is something else that KU has been, especially the USED, has been really involved with, and that is empowering Kansans to live self-determined lives. So when I say self-determined lives, what does that mean? Self-determination means being able to act or causing things to happen as you set and work towards goals in your life. In other words, we don't want people to be reactive or be have their environment dictate their lives. We want people to take control of their lives. And that's really what self-determination is all about, is that you are causing the things that you want in your life. And one of the ways that we do that with employment is that we have some trainings on self-determination, including what's known as the self-determination career design model. And using the self-determination career design model, people develop goals based upon their interests. They develop problem-solving skills that help them to negotiate the environmental opportunities and barriers. And then you keep using this self-determination career design model to develop not only an initial job, but also the idea of advancement, develop a long-term career identity through self-reflection and your career experiences. I think a lot of us have experienced changes in our career. Colleen earlier talked about how she started out in supported employment, and she is now a targeted case manager. So, and for me, I started out as a direct support professional, and now I moved into self-advocacy, and then my career took another turn, and I went into policy analysis, and now I'm a research project manager. And so it's really about developing a trajectory. And so what I'd like to do next is kind of share a video on how self-determination can impact.
Before you hit play, Craig, we did have one question out on Facebook. And I can't remember what you said, but are there any organizations in Southeast Kansas doing this? Can you remind us who the organization is that you're working down there with?
Or which party? We do have a community team in Southeast Kansas. We are partnering with Skill down there. They are not part of the pilot project. We are hoping that as we go forward and we were able to replicate what we're doing in the pilot project, that we will be able to touch all parts of Kansas with our endeavors.
Okay, I will let you know if they come back with a different question.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share a video from Susie Parker. I think you'll really enjoy this, talking about the importance of self-determination in the workplace.
Everyone's human, whether you have a disability or not. But when you have a disability, it's a lot harder, I feel like, for people to take you serious.
Susie Parker's employment journey.
So at Easter Seals, I am a self-determination instructor. And our job is to teach individuals with disabilities about their rights. I think it's a really, really important job. In order to get my job, you have to have a disability.
Susie's previous jobs.
Prior to this job that I have right now, I was a lunch lady. And I stuck out like a sore thumb as a lunch lady, but the people in the big managers loved me because I challenged them. When I applied, I had a job coach, and I had this job coach and that job for 5 years. It was the longest job I ever had. And I guess that's where I started to learn how to listen to a boss.
Susie's self-advocacy.
In that time, they wanted the only job that individuals with disabilities would get was a dishwasher job. And that wasn't me. I didn't want a dishwasher job. I wanted to be the cashier so I could see all the kids and talk to the kids and make sure that they're having a good day and that they're not bullied and, you know, they're accepted. And I fought for that. And the one manager wasn't going to hire me. And this other lady came in and she says, all right, if you can do it, I'm going to let you see. And she ended up going to the career center. And my job coach at the time was hidden in the back. And she told my story about how, you know, I've never hired somebody with a disability to do more than dishes. And she goes, but we have this young lady that came in and she swore up and down that she was more important and better than dishes and that I could do more than just dishes. And sure enough, it changed the rules. So that's my goal. I just love advocacy. I find it no matter what.
Susie's current job.
It has been nonstop. I have attended so many conferences and got to speak at so many conferences. And something that I was really not sure that I could be good at, and something that I was not sure that I could do. Suzanne had given me the backbone that I needed to believe in myself. And not only that, I had two bosses, Molly and Kendall, and they were fantastic.
Susie's dream job.
I honestly think that my dream job is what I'm doing now, even though I may not have known it back then.
To learn more, please visit kucdd.com.
I think we've got another chat here. Okay. So I think one of the things that Susie did is that she busted a myth about what people with disabilities could do through her advocacy. And so that I think that provides a nice segue to our next section, which is talking about busting some of the myths that surrounds competitive integrated employment and employing people with disabilities. There are myths we need to challenge. Because when we challenge these myths, we create cultural change, both in the community, for the employment providers, but then also for the family members and people who might think they may not want a job because of some of the fears and myths that they hold about employment. So one of the first myths, and this is really oftentimes an employer myth, is that disability employment compromises productivity. But the reality is that a study including 140 US companies by Accenture in partnership with the American Association of People with Disabilities and Disability found that companies higher in disability inclusion were in fact more profitable. So employing people with disabilities actually leads to higher productivity. And the findings suggested that these companies achieved on average 28% higher revenue and twice the net income of their peers. Another myth that we hear from employers is that accommodations for people with disabilities are too expensive. They can't afford to hire people with disabilities because any accommodations that they might need would cost too much. But the reality is, according to the U.S. Job Accommodations Network, a majority of workplace accommodations are made at no cost whatsoever. And then when costs are incurred, the typical one-time expenditure is approximately $500, which is minimal when considering the long-term value and the productivity, which is added by the employee. Moreover, much of what is thought of as an accommodation, such as closed captioning or flexible schedules, are in fact accessibility features that benefit most employees. I think about the Walgreens Corporation, who in some of their production centers and distribution centers made it a real effort to have a disability hiring initiative. And what they found is when they had the accommodations for the people with disabilities is that not only did it make people with disabilities more productive, but it made everyone more productive. And so the distribution center that first started this wound up being the most productive distribution center in the nation for the Walgreens Corporation. Some myth that people have, and this is something that we hear a lot of times with transition age folks, is that some people aren't able to work because of their disabilities. They say, well, we know some people have disabilities and they can work, but you don't know how disabled my child is. But the reality is that just like the general population, disabled people and people with disabilities have a wide range of talents, skills, experiences, and educational backgrounds. And I just want to share a video that I think is really powerful about a family that kind of dispelled that myth. Sometimes it's not the families who hold that myth, but the people who are supporting them. So I want to share this video, and you might recognize Joe if you're a longtime Kansas resident.
Bottom Dollars. Chapter 7, The Joe Hawk. Joe skis down the ski slope. Joe skis by giving 2 thumbs up. Joe uses an iPad to speak.
My name is Joe Steffi. I own Poppin' Joe's Kettle Corn.
A banner reads, I love Poppin' Joe's. Joe dumps the kettle corn popper.
As a business owner, I must be able to produce every type of popcorn product that I sell and complete the daily business tasks. This includes the weekly deliveries.
Joe places bags of his popcorn on shelves in a small store.
I am always active and love being busy.
Joe looks up from his iPad and gives a thumbs up. Joe plays a bell in his church choir and then plays basketball with ER.
My name is ER. He's my uncle. I live with him and I help take care of him. The Joe Hawk, yeah, he's everywhere he goes, will go like this, and he wants everyone to know that he has a Joe Hawk.
ER rubs the center of his head in reference to Joe's mohawk. Joe shoots and makes 2 baskets in a row. The rolling hills of Lewisburg, Kansas. Minimum wage, $7.25 per hour.
I was 14 years old. My parents and I met with my school transition team.
Ray and Janet Steffi.
And basically what they told us was, we don't know why we need to set up a plan, in that basically Joe has no attention span. He can't keep on task. He will never hold a job. So why do we need to make a plan?
Photos of Joe as a younger man.
You know the greatest disability there is? It is low expectation. They had no expectations for me.
We were known as parents with great expectations that were in denial of how serious the disabilities were that we were facing.
This ticked me off, in that I was going to prove to these people my son could work.
Joe pours out popped corn from a kettle.
There's a workshop, and we went in there to observe what they did and that kind of thing. And basically what we saw in there wasn't what we wanted Joe to go through, and basically not get paid for doing it anyways.
A Kansas farm, cattle grazing in the background.
I grew up in a farm. We milked cows. There were cows there. There were chickens there. And so there was a lot to do. You knew where you fit in. So I expected that out of my kids.
We needed to find something that we could do as a family.
Joe, Ray, and ER working in the backyard.
We didn't even know what kettle corn was at that time. We went on a cruise to Alaska, and it was in Anchorage, Alaska on a Saturday during market day. And there was this business there that was popping popcorn. and watched him pop and sell and everything. And there was a variety of jobs within the business. You could pop the corn, you could bag the corn, you could help sell the corn. All those were different phases. Well, I thought this would be ideal for Joe because when he got tired of one, he could move to another one, whichever one he wanted to do.
I learned by watching and would do exactly as I saw it done.
Which comes down to what customized employment is.
Title: Customized Employment.
Janet went to classes to learn how to write a business plan. We submitted that to the DD Council in Kansas, which at that time they were supporting people starting their own business. So they gave him all new equipment.
Joe making, bagging, and delivering the kettle corn.
And then we went to Social Security through their PASS plan. They supported the finances of his business by giving him cash flow money to make the business work for an 18-month period of time. And then we also got equipment from the Voc Rehab people for a computer and a printer to make labels. And so that's how we got started. And it became on the 5th day of April in 2005, the business became Joe's business, and he was the sole proprietor of that business and has been till this day.
Photo of Joe proudly holding papers in his hand.
We help manage the business. People say, well, how does he do his accounting? That well, like any other business, if you don't do accounting, then you hire an accountant. So that's what we do. We hire the people that are needed to run specific parts of the business. But basically, Joe is the owner of the business.
Joe and Ray wear matching tie-dye bandanas as they work at a stand selling popcorn.
Festivals average 3 weekends each month, April through October. I have several retail outlet stores where I supply products on a weekly basis, as well as internet sales.
Say we're out shopping. Somebody see me and they'll say, "Are you Poppin' Joe?" And you can just see Joe stands up straighter and gets a big smile, and he knows he's Poppin' Joe.
Exterior of Joe's house.
And the business has given him the opportunity to rent his own place, pay utilities. He buys his own food. He's not on any subsidy for food or housing or utilities. He pays his own way, and then he gets to choose the activities that he likes.
Joe skis to the ski lift. Ray and Janet look on as Joe takes the lift up.
When we're gone, then the business could go ahead and support him in the same manner. What we would like to see is to bring on a person who would be interested in being a partner in the business, doing the management part of the business. And Joe would keep the capacity that he has as being an owner.
The farm, it's a team effort. You all pull together to make it happen.
In the backyard, the family works together making kettle corn.
We expected Joe to be a part of and to do the part that he could do from the very beginning.
Share the full film in your community.
I think it's kind of interesting that Joe, who was told by his parents were told by the people who were supposed to be supporting him in the schools that why would we have a plan for Joe? He's never going to work. His disability is so significant. Don't even think about work. And yet now Joe, because of his business, probably is earning more money than the people who said he couldn't work. But that kind of leads to another myth, and that is what happens if you do earn money. There is a real concern that if people avoid employment because they're worried that they'll lose their benefits if they get a job. And in fact, the Kansas Disability Employment Survey results through the Employment Systems Change Coalition several years ago asked this question, and they found that 76.4% of Kansans with disabilities believe they'll lose their benefits if they get their job. But the reality is that earn a substantial paycheck and still retain their benefits. And there's numerous ways to do that. It's a lot more forgiving now than what it used to be. And Kansas also has specific programs like the Working Healthy Work Program and the STEPS program that allows you to earn more money and still receive Medicaid benefits, including paid supports and services. And then the last myth I want to kind of touch base on is, once again, that what will happen if I get a job? There's still that idea that you will lose your benefits if you get a job. But the reality is people can now save a substantial portion of their paycheck and still retain their benefits. And that is because of what's known as ABLE accounts, Achieving a Better Life Experience account. ABLE accounts came into effect in federal legislation, I believe around 2014. So they've been around close to 10 years. But the amount that can be contributed to an ABLE account has increased over time. And now Kansans can contribute up to $18,000 a year to an ABLE account. In fact, the Kansas State Treasurer's Department, KDADS, and the Kansas Council on Developmental Disabilities are currently doing a roadshow throughout Kansas to promote ABLE accounts. And if you're able to attend that and you're on the waiting list, they will give you $100 to put towards an ABLE account if you open up a new one. So the Kansas ABLE Savings Plan helps individuals to save while preserving both their SSI and their Medicaid. So before we close, I know we only have a couple minutes left. I would just like to ask if there's any questions or discussion topics the group would like to explore. If you would like to learn more about the Employment First Project and Employment First in Kansas, I'd invite you to visit the website, kansasemploymentfirst.org.
Great. Thank you, Craig. This has been great, informational. Does anybody have any questions? I don't see any on Facebook. I'll give it a minute. Oh,
Sorry about the dog.
I didn't even hear it. So, all right. Well, I'm not seeing anything. So I will say thank you and we'll close this out. We appreciate Craig coming and speaking to us tonight from the Kansas University Center on Developmental Disabilities. Here's some ways to follow them on social media to keep up with the research they are doing around employment and self-determination and supported decision-making. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening and we'll see you next month.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Stephanie.